So welcome everyone to this second session of Organic Gardening, Growing in the Garden State. It's sponsored by the Drumthwacket Foundation and Wells Fargo Foundation. Most of the filming you're going to see is actually filmed at Drumthwacket. We are collaborating with a chef on premises and the team of folks that work at Drumthwacket to grow what they've asked us to grow. And they're hoping to use the produce throughout the season for their events at Drumthwacket. And in the future, their aspiration is really to open up the mansion again and let people come in and have it be a teaching environment. So welcome everybody. Today, the course is going to be taught by Ariana Lindbergh from Rutgers and Al Johnson, who is on NOFA's board and is an organic inspector. So, you know, if you ever do decide to have an organic farm, Al's a key person to be nice to. Okay. All right. So let me just, hey, Charlie, how you doing?
Good. Thank you. And you?
Good, good. Okay. So I'm going to hit play because we have a, call it maybe 25-minute video that captures what we've been doing at Drumthwacket. And then Tomia, Al, and Ariana are going to take you through a slide presentation and answer any questions you have. Just to remind you, today's topic is really the continuation of last month's topic. It's the early season gardening. And also we're going to talk about transplants today. Ariana is going to actually take you through some slides so you can think about how to plan your garden. And I think you'll find those really interesting. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and share the video.
Hello and welcome to Growing in the Garden State, where our intention is to help make sure everyone is able to grow and raise their own food here in the state of New Jersey. My name is Tony, and I am one of the team members who has been given the opportunity to utilize Drumthwacket, the historic New Jersey governor's mansion, as a demonstration ground to show people how to raise their own food. In our first episode, we did bed prep, got some things ready to make sure our garden space was ready for a season ahead. In this episode, we're going to start planting some early season starts, some direct seeds, as well as review a few different irrigation methods to make sure we have water for our plants. So why don't you sit back, relax, and join me over at Drumthwacket to see what's growing on.
So if you recall from our first session, we demonstrated how to make soil blocks. So again, these are just an alternative to using a plastic pot for all of your transplants or trays. And as you can see, in the soil, all the roots are just nice and loose. So they're able to kind of air prune. They don't get root bound, which if you've ever bought plants that have been in a pot that's pretty small for a while, you'll notice that they get pretty cramped up at the bottom. And sometimes that gives it prevents them from kind of taking off straight away. So this keeps the roots nice and loose. So spacing on chard plants is, recommended would be about 12 inches. In a small space, you can get away with a little bit closer planting, so 8 to 10 inches. So I'm going to go kind of right in the middle and about 10 inches, which some tools will give you measurements. This is a nice transplanting tool because it has measurements here. So 6 inches from tip to kind of the hilt. And then, this is probably another 4 or 5 inches. So you can mark out with a tool kind of where your plants are going to be. You can also use, of course, just a regular old trowel. But I'm just going to dig a hole that's large enough to fit the whole root base. If you need to add any amendments, direct in the soil, depending on any deficiency, you can do that at this time. And then I'm just going to tamp it down like so. And then next, Swiss chard, right here. If you're doing a lot of plantings, I like to make all of my holes down the road and then just plunk, 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 pop the plants in. But here, you know, we have relatively short rows. So we don't really need to maximize our output for time. So this is chard. Again, the idea is that the peas will, you know, eventually grow up to probably about 3 feet. Those, once they're done producing, that foliage will die back. We'll cut it out. Chard does do fine with some shade conditions, so it's actually going to be kind of happy in this growing condition between the protection of the peas. And by the time the peas come out, that chard is just going to explode and get big right alongside its sister beets.
All right, welcome. Today we are going to trellis the peas that they had planted a couple weeks ago. Peas usually get 2, 3, sometimes 4 feet or higher. I think some varieties might get 6 feet tall. So if we don't give them some supports, we're going to use bamboo today. They'll easily go over and go on top of other plants, especially in this situation when we have a lot going on in a row. So we have these cut to size. This is a good resource if it's planted because it just keeps growing and growing and growing. So we got a bunch of bamboo, not too tall for these. And we have a hammer and some rope to get the rope tied up to it so that the tendrils of the peas can hook on there. So I'm going to start and just set the trellis posts up. You want to make sure they're anchored fairly well. So if we get a wind, you're not, the trellis isn't tipping over. That feels pretty good. I don't think that's going to fall anywhere. Down this end. When I picked out these bamboo, I was looking for nice strong ones that wouldn't shatter. And I'll put a couple more in between here. And then we can go and run some rope.
So one of the best things about starting a spring garden is we get to try new things. And so one of the new things that I've been trying this year and that we're going to try here is putting in edible flowers. Some people love them, some people don't. But if you've never had it, it's worth a try. So we're putting in pansies, which will give you a beautiful flower. If you don't like the taste of it, well, you just have pretty flowers. We're just going to take them. And because they don't get very big, we're only going to put them about 8 inches apart. Just going to take them, loosen the root a bit, pop it in, and there you go. About the same depth of the root ball that your plant is. If you ever are not sure about how deep to put your plants, think about as deep as the root ball or the seeds. So these are quite small. We just want to loosen it up a little bit so that the roots can spread out into the soil that they're growing in. If you leave it, then you don't. If you leave it and you don't loosen that root ball, all that will happen is that the roots will start going up in a circle around the plant, and then it doesn't expand, it doesn't grow as well, and it can actually get root bound and die. So it's really important.
Federal COVID relief money. Still ahead tonight, hear how two police officers saved their lives. 7 points out.
Cover them up.
The west side where the schools were out too.
All right, so what I'm going to add to this project, as some of you know, I'm a mushroom freak. I love foraging, I love eating mushrooms, and my last name is Kennett, like Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. But what I brought here is some wood chips that have already been inoculated and colonized by wine cap mushrooms, King Stropharia. I'm going to incorporate those into these pathways, and so then that way, as the season continues, it'll continue to eat up some of this other wood chips, and we'll have more food. So I'll show you what we're going to do over here. I'll add a little bit, just kind of sprinkle. I'll just do this one section here. You could use your hands if you're comfortable, but just kind of incorporate it into your pathway. And this will eventually just kind of start to take over the wood chips, and we'll have more food to eat. Now, wine cap mushrooms like shade, they like sun. They are going to want to get wet, so we're going to want to water these to get them to establish. But once they're in, they're in. As long as you keep giving fresh hardwood chips, so different mushrooms like different types of wood. These like mostly hardwood, but whatever you give them, they'll break up. And they don't mind if you step on them. But when you see the cute little fruits popping up, be mindful, watch them. It takes a couple days. Once they start pinning, then you'll see the fruiting body ready to harvest. Okay, so next we're gonna try planting some potatoes, and we've got several options here. One is this happens to be a small fingerling. We can put the whole thing into the soil. But before we actually talk about planting, I want to caution you to try to find potatoes that are grown specifically for planting. They're disease-free. They're verified disease-free. Doesn't mean that it's actually 100% disease-free, but you have a lot less chance of bringing any disease in. So we've got a whole small potato. We can plant a whole big potato, but more likely we want to cut this in half. Now, as long as I have an eye on each piece, I can cut this in half. There's plenty of potato here to plant a few times. So basically it's a simple operation. But I don't want to put this in the ground as is, because being freshly cut, it's very susceptible to rotting right there. So I want to let that sit for a couple of days, and it actually kind of turns, sometimes it turns black, brown, whatever. This is 2 days old. I actually recommend leaving it for another day, but this is exactly been there for 2 days. Again, I cut it in half. You can see there's an eye already there. It's starting to sprout. There's no problem with that. There's another eye there that will sprout. So I can plant those. I usually plant them about a foot to 15 inches apart. And I want to put that eye facing up. And you notice that I've got a trench. So what I will do now is I'll fill in so that it's all underground. If I leave those sprouts a little bit above ground, that's fine too. But I still have a bit of a mound here. Potatoes actually like to be continue to be buried because they tend to grow towards the surface of the ground. But if I have some soil up there that as I go through and cultivate and get rid of my weeds, I can spread a little bit more soil around there, and it buries those potatoes so that they don't get green. If they're sitting on the surface of the soil, they actually will start to turn green, and that's not the best.
Hi, I'm Christina Hyman. I'm a project manager with ISLES. We're a community development and environmental organization based in Trenton, New Jersey, and we've been serving the city of Trenton for 40 years. Our mission is to foster self-reliant families and healthy, sustainable communities. And we do that by designing and providing services in response to our community members' needs. And we offer a variety of different services, but today we're here to talk to you about our urban agriculture work. And Justin Allen, who is my colleague, is going to tell you a little bit more about that.
So we do a lot of urban ag work in the city. That was one of the first things that ISLES did 40 years ago, and it's nice to know that it still continues. So one of our main programs are the ISLES Garden Support Network, and we roughly have about 70 gardens we support, and they might include school gardens, community gardens, institution gardens around the city. And we provide them with seeds, seedlings, fertilizer. If we find lead in the soil, we might remediate or build raised beds. We could possibly acquire some compost or mulch for some gardens if needed, and consulting and just informational work to help them get them going. We might also get permits for state land or get the water turned on with Trenton Water Works. Some gardens do have access to water. We also have an incubator training garden, and that is a season long, and we work with 12 gardeners from the beginning of the season through the fall and give them all the resources they need to start gardening and learn how to garden on their own, and then they'll move along to either a community garden or possibly garden at their home. We also do a small production site, and the produce there, some of it gets donated, and we also participate in Greenwood Ave Farmers Market. It's a larger farmers market in the city, right by the train station. We do a lot in the schools. We work very closely with a few schools in their gardens with we have 2 food corps service members. We also have a community orchard with about 60 fruit trees that is not fenced in, right in the downtown of the city there, to provide some fresh fruit to people that are in the area. We do a lot of other stuff, but that I think sums up most of the urban ag work. Did I miss anything?
Got it all.
With onions, you'll have several options. One is you can purchase what I call onion plants. So this is an onion probably that was started, I think it started in the fall.
I got it.
But the seed companies will ship them depending upon your what growing zone you're in. And they're very simple to plant. They're more expensive than other things, but basically just a little bit underground, probably no more than an inch, and that's going to grow into a nice onion. They like to be planted early, so May's a little bit late because they will continue to grow and form a bulb until around the summer solstice, and then they start to they'll form green, and then at summer solstice they'll start to put that energy into a bulb. So the more you can get it to grow before the solstice, the better it is. So again, May's a little late, but it's not impossible. The other thing is they also come in at garden supply stores in onion sets. Now, I actually couldn't find an onion set. I have actually a clove of garlic. It's the same size. And basically just put that in the ground with the top facing up, and that's going to grow the same way. I don't like those as much. They're slower to grow. The plants are a lot faster to take off, but sometimes the plants are not available with the onion sets up. Now, if you're in a hurry for getting some kind of onion, I am going to show you a little trick. This is a scallion. I just purchased it at the store. And I am going to cut that off. And that's going to go in a soup or some other kind of recipe. And I leave the root on. And I'm just going to bury that right in the soil. And you'll see, you can do this as early as March. These are very hardy in the soil, but you can do it anytime, including midsummer. And in about 2 months, you'll see the green scallions that high, and you can go ahead and pick them in 2 ways. One is you could pull the whole thing out of the ground, or you can again cut it off at the surface and it'll grow another scallion. So you actually get 2 crops of this year. And they just keep coming in. By the fall, if you don't pick them during the summertime, they'll get to be leek size. Some of them will be that big. And you can use them as you do regular onions. You can use them as you do scallions. There's just a lot of use for it, and it's the easiest thing to grow. There's several options of tomato growing or purchasing your tomatoes, and I think Ariana and Camille have already demonstrated how to plant soil blocks. And so a lot of times, if you're buying your tomato, they'll come in what I call a cow pot or a peat pot. And these are meant to be put right in the soil. This tomato is a little bit small. I would like to let it go another week, but we'll use it for demo. But the first thing I do is I look at the tomato and I pinch off the bottom leaves. So that bottom leaf there, I'm just going to pinch it off. The reason I'm doing that is because the roots have to support the leaf matter. And the less leaf matter you have during transplant time, the less stress it is on the plant. Now these pots, I like to break them up a little bit, just so that the roots can grow through it. And I've already dug my hole. I'm gonna put it in my hole, and I'm gonna bury it. I like to bury it up to the first set of leaves that I've left on. And I want to cover that peat too, or the cow, I think it's called a cow pot. It's maybe cow manure. So you see there's not much coming out of the soil, but I do have that, I have not covered up the area where those first leaves come out. If I do, I could rot the growing point, which is right there. You may also end up purchasing a tomato in a pot. This one is quite a bit bigger, and I will actually show you a couple of tricks for this. The roots are in good shape. They've taken up most of the pot. But again, I am going to cut off the bottom leaves. And I'm going to go up quite far on this one. And this might be a hard thing to do. You say, oh, those things look so nice, but I'll show you why I'm doing that. Several reasons, actually. One I already mentioned, but the other is this stem material is the same as the stem below the surface. So it too will grow roots. So with this one, a little bit oversized, rather than just digging a round hole, I'm digging a trench. And I am going to lay my tomato in on its side. Be careful not to bend it too much because I'll break it. But I am, again, trying to bury it to the bottom leaves. And I'm going to make sure you cover the roots because if you don't, it's going to dry the plant out. Unless you want your tomatoes to run on the ground, in which case they're a lot more susceptible to disease, you want to stake them. So there's a lot of different methods, different materials, and I think you've already seen a demo on staking peas. It's not too much different. This is actually a tomato stake. You can buy it at most garden supply stores. I like to get the ones that are 6 feet high because I like to be optimistic that my tomatoes are going to be that high. And you can bang them in with a hammer. Now, what's this? This is an old shampoo bottle. I put it at the top of the stake because I want to use my stake over and over again. And if I hit the wood, it's going to end up splitting the wood. So I'm hitting the shampoo bottle instead. And I have several of those a year.
This area up here, we're going to do the summer squash, and we want to create some mounds. We tend to do well in creating about a mound, about 1.5 to 2 feet wide. And then we'll plant the seeds right up in the mound. I like to overseed. Sometimes the seeds we get, they're donated or they're a little older, they still should be viable, but you just want to maybe plant a few extra to ensure good germination. So there's our mound. And I'll put maybe 4 or 5 seeds with the intention of thinning it out to 1, possibly 2 once we get the plants are an inch or 2 and we see how well they're doing. They're pretty large. General rule of thumb for seeds is about 2 to 3 times the width for the depth. So I'm going to push these down 1/2 inch to 1 inch in the soil. I like to pick some of the bigger seeds out, but I don't know if that's just really going to be helpful or not as far as the health of the plant. So I'll drop about 5 here. Again, if they all germinate, we want to make sure we take some out. They are very large plants, squash and zucchini. They want to take up all the real estate in the garden. So just trying to keep them in check a little bit, push those down about 1 inch. And that's it for that.
So now that we've got everything planted, we need to worry about water. We're probably going to have to worry about water for the rest of the season. Certainly in our area, we get a lot of rain, but not consistent. So I am going to water some of the seedlings we just planted today. And this is a watering can. It's about 3 gallons. And I really like it because the spray comes up. So it doesn't go down and wash away my soil. It's more of a gentle rain. And you'll see that. Okay, so I have water in what I call sheens. And if you can focus in on there, you see that puddle of water? That's what I call a sheen. As soon as you see a sheen on the top of the soil, then it's had enough water. So I want to go on and continue watering down the row. Now, you need to get to know your soil, and it depends upon the time of year too. This is still springtime, so the soil doesn't dry out quite as quickly, but I give my plants at least 3 sheens. Summertime, I have to go up to 7 sometimes, but you have to find out what happens in your own soil. So in other words, give it a couple of sheens, dig down a little bit, see how far the water is penetrated. And my guess is, yeah, it's dried down about 1/2 inch. So I'm going to need to do at least 3 sheens here, just keep trying. But if you think you're doing a thorough job of 3 sheens in the spring, again, try it again in the summertime, because the summer it dries out a lot faster. The soil is drier underneath, and so you may have to adjust that. Now, several other options are. One is various kinds of soaker hoses. The water is on here. I think you might be able to see some drops coming down. But there's little minute holes in this, and it's just dripping water bit by bit. And it's a nice slow water, it's not causing any erosion. There are different types of drip irrigation. This one happens to be, whoops, plastic pipe. Pretty easy to put together, but again, you get plastic you have to dispose of, whereas this one will last for years. The directions will come with it, but basically you push it on as far as you can, and then you, whoops, had it the wrong way. And then you kind of screw it on, and that'll hold. There are attachments that will hook right up to your hose. So no problem, easy to use. You probably could get a couple of years out of that, but you're also risking keeping disease in the garden that may have been in that hose for a future year. So other options, sprinkler. I would recommend spending a little bit more on a quality sprinkler. Now, why do I call this a quality sprinkler? It's got adjustments here, so I can go over there as far as I want, or just do a few feet in the middle. The other thing is that these little nozzles where the water comes out are going to clog up with dirt eventually. You can't help that. So this one, I really like it because it has this little attachment on the end. It's actually the plug for the end of the hose. But let's see if you can see that. You have to really focus in on it. It's got a little pin right there. So if I get a nozzle that's stuck, actually I do this periodically anyways, I can just stick it in whatever hole is stuck. Whoops, and it'll clear it right out. These actually are parts that are replaceable. This particular model, I think it's a Dram, and I know the place where I bought this has replacement parts. So there's, that's what I call a good quality one, that you're not just buying it, throwing it away if something happens, but you can actually maintain it. So there's actually two styles of nozzles. One is really inexpensive. You can see you can adjust the spray by going like that, back and forth. It'll get a stream or get a spray, but they're kind of hard to use. I like these ones that have a little handle, and you can see, whoa, I can go in a fine spray, or I can, let's see, I can go in if I have to reach a long ways, I can go in more of a jet like that. So the same principle is with the watering can. I want to water for a sheen. I've got a sheen right there, if you can see that. So it's time to move down. And one mishap that could happen with the hose is that I have to watch where the back of my hose is, because I could ruin the radishes that I planted in this row.
All right. Well, I hope you have absorbed some really great information, and I'm sure your gardens are going to be that much better this year because of it. Now, if you would like to help sponsor another family to be able to have the opportunity to grow and raise their own food, please visit us at NOFA-NJ.org to figure out a little bit more how you can donate either your time or some dollars to help ensure other people can grow and raise their own food. Now, I would like to say thank you once again for watching, and that in our next episode, it's going to be all about pest management. Organic gardening, we don't use pesticides, right? So how do you protect and prevent against pests? Well, you'll find out in the next episode. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Okay. So maybe before Ariana, maybe you can work on getting your slides on the screen. And before we get started with the slides, we can take any questions that folks have on the video. We have Ariana and Tomia and Al standing by in case you have questions. Anyone?
Yeah, we are happy to take any questions now or at any point during the presentation.
Okay, so you know what? I think you can just crash ahead and, if you have a question, go ahead and unmute yourself and just ask the question, because I think that'll be easier than waiting till the end. Because some of these slides are packed with information and you may have questions as we go. All right?
Yeah.
Great.
So, and I'm gonna call on my colleagues, so Al and Tamia, if you wanna voice in on anything, or help keep me on track, as I want to carry on about some things. But so again, this is more about kind of what you should be doing now, which, we're hoping that there's lots of future gardeners out there who are hoping to get some additional information. And if I can figure out how to advance my slides, there we go. So I wanted to first talk a little bit about garden or field planning. So depending on like how big of a space you have, whether it's a garden or a field, or even like some pots, like literally right now I have 2 4x4 raised beds and some big pots. That's how I'm gardening. And I was farming and I hope to farm again at a larger scale in the future. But deciding what to grow and how much of it, as well as where you're going to plant it, when it will be planted, takes a fair amount of thought, right? And so these are some images of kind of, thinking out the garden space, right? So you want to know when things need to go in the ground, what things like to be planted next to each other, what things don't like to be planted next to each other, sun, shade, there's a lot to really consider. This is just, so I mentioned this idea of companion planting. And so this is kind of a close up, and there are certain things that really don't do well next to each other. And I think this will all be provided as either a PDF or part of the presentation, so you can come back to it. But thinking about where you plant things, and also where you plant things seasonally, so that you're not always growing tomatoes in the same place, because they are going to, take up certain nutrients from the soil that, potentially, beans aren't, right? So you want to make sure that you think about kind of where things are going. And
so can you talk about one of those examples? Like,
of course.
So this one, garlic grows well near broccoli, cauliflower, and lettuce, but not beans and peas.
Right. And I have always heard that, like, you don't want to put your garlic next to your beans.
But we did in the field there. Oh no.
Well, Nagisa, we're doing an experiment. So really, I mean, most of it has to do with like what certain plants are able to contribute, and then also what they need. So what they're extracting, right? And so there's this balance of what they're putting in to the garden space and what they're taking out. And then there are some, I think, I don't know what you call them, sorry, my vocabulary is terrible tonight. Enzymes that certain plants produce that don't work well with others. So like you think of, like there are certain trees that exude this allelopathic stuff where nothing around them will grow. And so different plants give off different kind of allelopathic or enzymatic kind of stuff. And so it is helpful to, for those of you growing in a small space, like if you're like, yeah, I don't know why my beans didn't grow by my onions. It's like, okay, well, maybe they were not happy. Tamia, do you have, I see you're unmuted.
I do. I was trying to, didn't want to interrupt. One of the things also that and we'll touch on this later, but it does kind of go hand in hand is the fact that there is some natural pest control that can happen when you're planting, when you plan your planting for certain things. For example, with carrot fly and things like, some plants deter other pests.
Yes.
Or mask it with scent, or deer even. Those things matter. The other thing, if it's okay, I wanted to add to the thought process about what you're planting and where. One of the things that I find is that when you're thinking about what you're planting, make sure you're planting things that you really love to eat. Because a lot of times you get the catalogs and it's like, everything's so beautiful and they tell you how delicious everything is. And all of a sudden you've got 100 packets of seeds and 50 square feet of space. So you really want to think about what your family actually consumes. And a lot of people actually underestimate that. So really give it some thought about what you're consuming. And also where you can reach. So for instance, when we moved into our place, there are beds, some are 10 by 7. And then there are others that are 4 feet deep with a gate around. Well, I'm almost 6 feet tall and I can't reach into, a 8 foot deep section of the bed. So you want to make sure that you're planting, especially if you're an average height, 3 feet, no further than 3 feet from wherever you access your garden bed. Because if you can't reach it, you won't prune it, you won't harvest it. It'll just end up going to waste, and then you'll be frustrated and think, I'm a terrible gardener, when in actuality, you couldn't reach it. So maybe put things like Brussels sprouts that won't be ready till November in the back. They're tall anyway. So put them to the north side of the bed where you don't have to reach, and put the grab and go, like the lettuce and the spinach and maybe, things like that you're going to want to get more often towards the front of the bed, so the south side of the bed.
That is fabulous. Thank you so much, Tamia, for that. And yeah, like knowing what you can, your capacity for growing. And I totally get drawn into the seed purchasing. I'm like, oh, I want that and that. I'm like, can't grow it.
So on that subject, the chef really wanted squash and cucumbers, but we didn't put them in the beds because they take a lot of space. So you may be wondering why we didn't plant any cucumbers and zucchini. They're such classic New Jersey vegetables, but they actually do take up a lot of space for the amount of vegetables you get. So
exactly. And that's the other thing to think about is like, if you just have a small space to grow, what is the most, whether you think about it as like nutrient dense thing you can grow, or something that you can cut multiple times, like, a salad mix, versus having a single tomato plant, like an heirloom tomato plant that might give you 5 tomatoes after so much love.
Also, go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, if you think about it in terms of how much, even like what you would pay for those tomatoes or the mesclun mix, you're probably better off doing like a lot of greens and those kinds of things, rather than sort of taking care of a tomato plant over the course of 3 months.
The other thing I was going to say is you can also think about, your space and how you can elevate things. So if you have an A-frame trellis, the A-frames, the one my favorite one, literally it's a grid up the side and 2 poles. And you can actually run your cucumbers. Squash might be a bit much, but it's an option. But certainly the cucumbers will run right up that, and you can put your greens and your lettuce underneath and sort of give them some shade from the afternoon sun as well, so that you actually keep them longer. So you can think about, ways to, a lot of people are using cattle panel now as arches and trellises and everything, and you can plant underneath. So you have to think a little bit about how to best use, as you said, every bit of real estate.
Yeah, and we get creative here where I live. I have groundhogs and deer, and so I have things like up on different levels and fenced in individually. So it's gardening is not like it's a wonderful thing, but there are these elements where you have these challenges that you have to overcome. And I think that's part of the delight, is that, at the end of a tricky season, you have food that you've grown. Like it's a miracle. So,
I think everyone should lay their food out. Whenever you harvest, I actually lay it out on the kitchen counter and I take a picture. And it just feels good.
You know what? We should start an Instagram like hashtag or something where everybody on this call can put their produce there.
Yeah.
So anyway, this will be available after the call. I want to move on because we have oodles to get through. Oops, I have two screens going, forgive me. So just as a very brief, when you're planning a garden, and I know at this point it's a little bit late in the season for kind of drawing up the plans, but this was kind of my initial sketch for the drum thwacket garden. Right, so we have this raised bed that's in a parking lot. It's like, all right, we need typically like 3-foot beds are good because you can do either multiple rows of smaller greens or single rows of tomatoes, eggplants, whatnot. And so it kind of set up this structure, and then an area for perennial herbs, right? So those are going to stay there year in, year out. And then I did a little in my dorky Excel kind of love. I put in like, all right, when are these things going in? What's the spacing? How many plants can we fit into this? And I always over plant. I don't know if I will ever not over plant. And so this helps me keep on track in terms of how many plants a certain area can kind of accommodate. I'm not suggesting that you all create spreadsheets for your planting, but this was helpful for us to understand like how we could do succession plantings, right? So we would do like early greens, but then put in later summer plants.
Ariana, even if you don't have a spreadsheet, my philosophy is that your best gardening book is your own diary.
Absolutely. Yeah, because and that's something actually I'll probably like touch on in the next couple of slides, is like you get to know your seasons, right? Like in your particular environment, like some of you might be growing in like a little microclimate, right? That's either a little bit colder or a little bit warmer than surrounding areas. And just to have that kind of on the books, so to speak, you're like, yeah, I put my peas in on St. Patrick's Day. Like that's how it works. So I wanted to, again, even though like some of this is a little bit delayed in terms of starting seeds, but I think, especially for those of you who are planning on future years of growing, I hope this is beneficial. But like, even if you don't have a greenhouse, you can definitely get like a 3 or 4 month jump on the planting season just by starting seeds indoors. And what I have found, and probably countless other gardeners and farmers, that is that the seedlings that we start ourselves establish and take off much more quickly and robustly than their store-bought counterparts. And I think Al was kind of getting to this in some of his commentary in the film that we saw. And part of this is, you know, quality control, lack of that root boundness that we talked about when transplanting the chard, or just simply like the fact that we're in tune with our weather patterns and we can harden things off, and really get them out into the garden at the time that they need. So you can start seeds in many different ways. You can use all kinds of different containers. We talked about the soil blocks. So you can see that on the bottom right hand picture. You can start things in the windowsill, under lights. The top image is actually a picture from my office up at Rutgers when I was managing the student farm, and I hung some shop lights to get vegetables growing and have this plastic over top just to help with the humidity. The bottom middle image is actually a photo from a studio that I taught where students actually grew the vegetables that we planted at the student farm. And so you can do all kinds of different ways of starting plants. And if you can, I think that's the best way to go. But there are also always times to purchase. Sorry.
And Ariana, most farmers markets will have organic farmers selling seedlings this time of year.
Yes, exactly. And those, like, you can, that would be my first recommendation for purchasing plants, is from a local farmer's market, because you know that they're in the same region you are, and those plants have been grown in the exact climate that you're in. So I'll go through these next couple of slides pretty quickly. Again, because I'm talking back to January and February for starting seeds. So if you were to start seeds for transplants, onions, and Al showed you a couple of techniques for onions. So you can get onion sets, or you can start with like the scallion root. But if you wanted to grow from seed, late January and early February is the best time to start those, so that once they go out, they are ready to go. It's a great time to start perennial herbs that tend to be slower growing, right? So your sage, your thyme, etc. And then other cool weather crops that once you put them out are gonna love it. So our cole crops, right? Or brassicas, so cabbage, kale, collards, etc. Is there a question? I hear some. Okay. March, April is a good time to start your annual herbs, right? So basil, cilantro, so that by the time they're ready for transplant, the nighttime temperatures. So really, like for things like basil, cilantro, the Solanaceae family, right? So your tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, and your squashes. So the cucurbit family, they are not going to be happy if nighttime temperatures are below 50. And so you want to keep an eye on that. In terms of field or garden preparation, there are a number of ways you can approach it. These are all ways I have done it. Working in a rocky field with a sledgehammer to break up the rock, letting the chickens scratch around, or simply using a shovel and a rake. And Al has very generously showed us a lot of those different techniques. Direct sowing cool crops can be done in a number of ways. We also showed you a couple of those last month, right? So kind of this like sprinkling technique with the really small seeds, as well as the larger seeds like peas. If you have a large space, you can, experiment more with, using methods like the, a seeder or kind of broadcast seeding. So right now, the things that are growing happily include, some of these late spring or cold resistant crops. So these are things that are actually at this point, more or less ready to harvest, right? So we have arugula, celery, early plantings of carrots, radishes. Radishes are probably the most rewarding thing because they're about a 20-day from seed to harvest, and you get these beautiful radishes. Nagisa and I just the other day, yesterday, when we were at Drumthwacket, harvested some radishes, and man, they were delicious. And thank you, Nagisa, for not posting that video of me eating my radish.
No, there's still time, my friend.
Oh, okay. So then just to go through a couple of the transplanting techniques. So Al did a really wonderful job of talking about how you want to plant this tomato pretty deeply up to its first set of true leaves. So those, oops, I'm sorry. I don't know if you can see can you see my little cursor hand wiggling around? So these first two little things that just look like little, like, I don't know, they don't look like tomato leaves. Those are called cotyledons, and that's the first thing that comes out of the ground. Those, show up before the first true leaves, which are here. And then you have the whole sucker situation, which Al was talking about. And that's where, so you have these axil areas, and then you have these additional little sucker plants. Tomatoes are vines, right? So their natural inclination, if you will, is to just like spread out as they will. Like the tomato plant is not necessarily interested in producing the biggest, juiciest fruit. It just wants to produce. It wants to reproduce. And so it's going to send out all these vines through each axial member along the leaf. The idea is that by suckering, so by plucking off these little suckers, the plant will put more energy into producing larger fruits on a single vine. So I know people who sucker, and I know people who don't sucker. And I'm happy to take questions about that later. But I also want to, let me check the time, and the geese, I know you're like panicking now. Oh my God, she's talking. She hasn't shut up yet.
No, because I think we need to see if anybody has any questions. Right?
Yeah, so questions at this point before we go into pollinators.
Yeah, and just if anybody's curious about the science of climate change and warming, there is a new presentation up on the site which goes into how much it's warming in New Jersey. And so we did have a little debate as to whether to talk about insects and pests this month or next month. And we had originally set it up for next month. So yeah, unfortunately, I think you're probably already seeing a lot of pests in your gardens because it has been very warm, cumulatively since the beginning of the spring. So yeah, it's interesting. They said last night that where we used to see 3 rounds of pests, now New Jersey should regularly expect 4 rounds. So that just gives you some sense of it. And we were talking to a instructor from Delaware, University of Delaware Extension, and she talked about a whole bunch of heat resistant varieties. So if you're curious what a variety looks like when it isn't doing well in heat, and you recognize that picture from your own experience, you might want to look into these heat resistant varieties. Because she did have a lot of trialing going on. It was very interesting. So those charts are actually already posted on the site as well.
There was a question in the chat. Gregory asked, how often should you water your seedlings when you first plant them?
So can I handle that one? Greg, again, you should water deep and not as often. You don't want to dry those seedlings out. But if you water a little bit every day and just get the surface wet, then the roots are going to stay on the surface, and you're going to be really susceptible to drought or going on vacation, losing everything, something like that. So yeah, I can't really give you a number of days, but generally I find that particularly when I've got some small things or seedlings, I can usually get away with about 3 or 4 days. Heat of the summer, well, actually in the springtime when it's still cool and wet, probably a lot less than that. But heat of the summer, sometimes it's down to 3 days. But again, watering deeply is going to eliminate the need to water often.
Also, Ariana, if it's okay, I wanted to add something to the bed prep.
Yes,
for people, because with the digging and everything, there, like you said, there's lots of ways to do it. If you have mobility issues or you're older and you're physically a bit limited, another thing that you can do is you can actually lay out tarp. The black plastic is best, but even if it's just a tarp from your big box store, if you notice, if you ever leave bags or anything on the ground long enough, it kills the grass underneath. And that grass will continue to break down. The best time to do it is in the fall for your following year. And that will give you a really big head start because your worms will all come to the surface and help to break down that grass and weeds and material. And it'll be a lot less work when you go to prepare your beds. And if you have pretty decent soil already, you may not have to do any digging at all. So a little advanced planning can save you a lot of back work. I do it even if you don't have issues. It's a great way to do it, just get started.
that is super advice. Thank you, Tamia. And I should take your advice because I tend to do the hardest route. I don't know why. But let's talk about pollinators and beneficial insects super briefly. I just looked at my clock. So at 7:05, I'm going to try to do this in 15 minutes so we have plenty of time for questions at the end. So there we go. So basics of pollination, right? So the process by which pollen is transferred to the female reproductive organs of a plant, which thereby enables fertilization, right? So, I mean, it's like us humans, right? Like to have a baby, we need fertilization. So for this to be successful, a pollen grain that's produced by the anther, and you can see this in the diagram, so that's the male part of the flower, that has to be transferred to a stigma, which is the female part of a flower, of a plant of the same species, right? And so this is what needs to happen for us to have food, right? Because the product of that fertilization of a flower is the fruit or the vegetable, right? And so what we're most interested in, this conversation this evening is this biotic one that requires organisms that carry or move pollen grains from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another, right? And so this is called the biotic. Of course, like some things can self-pollinate, others just rely on the wind. Corn is a great example that relies on the wind, which is why you get so much of that pesticide and GMO drift, right? So why you can't grow organic corn next to somebody who's growing GMO corn, but that's another topic that we won't go into. So just by way of like a quick kind of history, coevolution of plant pollinator evolution, beetles and flies and wasps are thought to be the first pollinators, which kind of accidentally spread the pollen while they were feeding on flowers. And you'll see this today in some things where like flies and such they're kind of messy pollinators, but we need them for things like pawpaws and things that bloom really early when the flies first come out. So this is what kind of set the stage for more complex plant or pollinator relationship. And so, we first started with these passive pollinators, but then we get to the fact that certain flowers are like, well, I'll give you something back, right? And so we have the relationship with the honeybees, for example, where they can then take that pollen, the protein, and the nectar, which is the sugar, and store those for use in the colony. So again, if you have further questions about this, I know I'm like racing through like a huge biology lesson, and I'm not a scientist. I'm a landscape architect and geographer. So, but it's fascinating, this plant pollinator coevolution, and so part of it relies on ultraviolet invitations, right? And so a flower's color or its odor or its shape, the size and timing are really important for this. So I don't know if any of you have heard that these blue flowers, so like the borage in the top image, honeybees love flowers that are that color. And even though borage and I have sort of I don't know, we have kind of a tenuous relationship, because the plant itself, I love the flowers, but the plant itself gets really ugly, in my opinion. And I've only ever grown it just because I know the bees love it. And so, you can think about these things in terms of what you can attract. And the other thing is like the, I don't know if I have it on the slide. I don't think I do. Maybe perhaps the next one. Yes, the shape. So for pollinators, they love kind of more shallow or clustered areas that have a, like, if you think of them as being like little airplanes, right? Like they're flying around. They want to have a good landing pad. And so flowers that have kind of this umbelliferous construction. And so if you think of like Queen Anne's lace, which is related to our consumed carrot, right? That is an umbelliferous plant. So it's like an umbrella of tiny, tiny flowers. They can land on it and get their nectar and pollen. So again, just super quick buzz pollination stuff here. They collect the pollen on their hind legs. You can see that they have these pollen baskets. And the thing is, we absolutely need them because 90% of flowering plants and a third of the crops that we eat rely on biotic pollination. So we can definitely do things to help them out. And it's not just the honeybees. The honeybees always get like all the attention, right? You know, colony collapse disorder, et cetera, et cetera. But we also have a ton of native bees, which tend to be more solitary, so they don't live in a hive condition. Again, these slides will be posted since I'm racing through them. But the little native bees are also, they are so incredible. And we also have a ton of like little parasitic wasps that we can talk about next month in conjunction with our pest discussion. But we have literally thousands of native bees who are out there taking care of our food crops. So this gives you a little bit of information about what you can do to help promote native bee colonization around you, or not colonization, but just habitation. Butterflies are also pollinators. They love their flowers. Moths are kind of typically the pollinators of the night. Although we have a couple of moths like the hummingbird moth who likes to come out in the daytime and drink nectar. Beetles are important to remember, right? They tend to be kind of messy pollinators and their bodies are heavier, right? Because they're not flying. And so they tend to go to like chunkier flowers that can support their weight. Flies, again, are also important. And so these are ways that you can potentially help to support these folks.
Great. So Ariana, I think we should probably stop at this point.
Okay.
We are due to finish at 7:15.
I know. Okay.
If there are any other questions, like quick questions from anyone, we should take those. And then say thank you for joining us. And we're going to continue with pollinators as well as the pest insects in your and other pests in your gardens next month. All right. And of course, I welcome you to send in questions in between if you want us to address something specific. All right.
Yeah, and also I'll put in my email too, so that if for everybody.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. And if you know somebody who missed the session tonight, it will be posted tomorrow morning. So not to worry, or in fact, if you want to look at something in addition to what you saw tonight, and we will post the presentation as well. All right. Okay, so happy spring. Enjoy the nice weather. It has been really dry. So it, you know, even though it's supposed to be wet in the spring, water your gardens. All right. Have a wonderful evening and thank you for joining us. All right.
Hi, thank you.
Mm.